Joining us now, legal analyst Jack Ford. Jack, nice to see you this morning. So, Lee sort of set out the two camps here and what they're obviously each going for. The defense's 45-page memo, 34 letters of support talking about this prison of self-punishment that Dr. Conrad Murray is in. How much sway will that really have?
Well, it depends on how the judge is looking at this thing. When a judge sits down and says, all right, what's the sentence supposed to be? Look at two things. They look at the crime itself. What happened? What were the consequences? Then they look at the defendant and say, all right, who am I dealing with here? Is this somebody who has been in trouble before? Is there a likelihood that this person is going to get in trouble again down the road? So when you're defending somebody like this, especially somebody who hasn't been in trouble before, and up until this incident, it's a terrible incident, but up until this incident has lived a fairly exemplary life, you want to pile that on if you're the defense attorney. Get as many letters as you can from as many people as you can possibly say, and say, look, the argument is this was a terrible, tragic accident, but not an intentional murder. Give him a break because of who he is and what he's done with his life.
Still unlikely, though, that he just gets probation, right?
The interesting thing, Jeff, is if the victim in this was Joe Smith, who nobody had ever heard of before. The defense, for instance, argued this would have been a civil malpractice case, not a criminal case. I think probably still a good chance it would have been a criminal case. Better likelihood of probation, but because it's such a high-profile case, some cases and some sentences are message sentences, where judges want to send a message to people, and I think this is probably going to be one of those.
Even if a message is sent, how much time could he actually do? Perfect example, of course, being Lindsay Lohan, trying to send a message with those sentences. She's out in a matter of hours at times.
That's a real question whenever you're dealing with the federal. Yeah, the overcrowding. You got a federal court decree saying you've got to lighten up your load inside of the prisons. One of the things, if he goes, how long will he do? I think the reality is most people are saying it'd be a question of days, weeks, months, as opposed to years, if in fact he does go to prison.
The state is also asking the Jackson estate get restitution in the amount of $100 million. My assumption is that Conrad Murray does not have that on hand easily.
Doesn't have it, and I'm not so sure the judge would impose it, although he might hear. That's the type of claim you would see in a civil lawsuit afterwards, saying, here's what we would lose. Usually in the criminal scheme of things, there has to be some certainty as to what somebody lost as a direct result of your conduct here. Doesn't mean the judge won't impose that. I'd be a little surprised if he does.
Well, but they're saying the reason they're asking for that is because that was what he was projected to make from this tour. So obviously, if he is no longer alive to do that. They were also asking for almost $2 million for memorial and funeral costs.
Yeah, that is something that might be a little bit more likely. But again, the question is, if he goes to jail, what sort of capability does he have to pay for all of these things? And, the interesting thing about this, and whether he goes to jail or not, we're seeing that those interviews that he did are coming back to haunt him. Because now that the prosecution is saying, look, a big factor in a sentencing is always your acceptance of responsibility. That's what you want your client to do if you're a defense attorney. And here they have him out there doing these interviews saying, it wasn't my fault, it was his fault. So I know he wanted to get that out there, but it might not be helping him when it comes time for sentencing.
Jack Ford, always good to see you, sir.
Jack, thanks.